All right, new chapter, page 248. Chapter 9 dealt with, as he's about to say, with the godly soul and the animal soul and the terrible strife and battle that there is between the two, a battle that most of us live every day. A battle that really never has determined and maybe has a determined, but doesn't have a permanent victory. It's a battle that we fight each and every day, animal soul versus the godly soul. This chapter will focus much more on the godly soul and the way indeed it can express itself best so that the animal soul is succumbed each and every day. That's really what chapter 10 is all about. But let's speak Rabbi Stern's words here and then the Tanya's words themselves. Let's start, as he said, middle of page 248. Chapter 9 spoke of the perpetual battle. Does anyone want to read? Anyone? Okay, Margot, go for it.
Okay, I'll go. Chapter 9 spoke of the perpetual battle between the two souls in man, each of which desires to gain total mastery over the body and be the sole ruler of its faculties. It gave a very general description of the godly soul's aims: to conquer the animal soul, subjugate it, and ultimately transform its nature. The chapter did not, however, discuss how long this can take, how much work is involved, or what the chances of success are in this battle. It merely outlined an ideal, what the godly soul aims to achieve in its battle with the animal soul. This chapter continues with a more detailed discussion of the godly soul's aims, not as a battle plan that anyone can implement, but as a description of various types of goals that can be gained in the battle, even if one falls short of a complete victory over one's animal nature.
Right. Okay, good. So that's the introduction to the chapter. Again, speaking about this chapter, we'll speak more about the divine soul. Also, the divine soul as it expresses itself in us, or I should say in me, the regular people, and the divine soul as it expresses itself in the righteous too, because there's a lot to learn about how the righteous ensure that the godly soul is always in control. So let's continue here. Now, when a person, now the words of the Tanya, go for it.
Okay, now when a person fortifies his godly soul and battles his animal soul to such an extent that he expels and eradicates its evil from the left ventricle, as is written, and you shall eradicate the evil from within you.
Right.
The literal meaning of this verse is in the social context, referring to the elimination of an evil individual from the community. Here, the author is applying it to the person as an injunction to eliminate the evil element within oneself.
Right. Just stop there. So it's important to know two things. First of all, the eradication of evil. The eradication of evil, number one, doesn't always happen. As he's about to say, this happens maybe to tzaddikim, or to the completely righteous, or to the incomplete righteous people. But for us, the eradication of evil, the uprooting of evil, really seldom happens. The book, let us remind ourselves, is called Sefer Shel Beinonim. That's what the Tanya is called, which means the book of the in-between people, the people that will never reach that ultimate level of completely being victorious. On the other hand, the people who have the power and the tools and the strength necessary to overcome that evil each and every day. So the eradication of evil here really speaks to the very selected few. On the other hand, and that's the most important thing for this chapter that we're about to study, this eradication of evil, or at least this overcoming of evil, can happen with really one method. And if I had to pick the single method between all the other methods, I would pick the method of consistency. Like any skill, like any talent that cannot be fully owned if it is not worked on day in and day out, right? The best basketball player, the best pianist in the world, the best violinist in the world, they practice this skill for hours and hours every day. So too here, in order to try and reach the eradication of evil, the most important method is to work on those small battles each and every day and ensure that we are victorious with these small battles, whether they are battles of just self-control, and could be self-control, as we've mentioned in the past, over things that are not necessarily evil, but just are very worldly, like eating. Maybe I have this habit to just jump on food when I see it. Maybe I should wait a few minutes, or a few seconds at least. Or maybe I'm, there are more evil traits like anger. Maybe I want to become very angry now, but should also wait a few seconds. And sometimes if I wait, then the anger dissipates. So it's these small battles that we have to engage in each and every day that eventually enable us to reach somewhat of a level, maybe not completely of eradicating evil, but at least to somehow control it. That comes again with consistency, day in and day out. And there are times in which we'll fail, and that's just fine. The most important is to get up and continue to fight those battles. But it's important to create consistency in this battle, in this battle between the animal soul and the godly soul, because without it, really, the evil not only will not be eradicated, but it also won't be controlled. So that's just an important idea. But let's continue maybe just a few more lines, and then we can develop this.
Okay.
I'll go ahead.
And when a person indeed eradicates the evil from himself, yet the evil is not actually converted to good, he is called an incomplete Sadiq.
Right.
This is one of the 5 types of Sadiq, righteous person, mentioned in the Tanya's opening chapter, which alternatively is referred to as a Sadiq to whom is evil.
Right. So tzaddik viralo. So that he still has some evil in him. The evil doesn't speak to him. The evil it's just like someone living in my house or something like a pet living in my house that I don't care for too much. It doesn't influence me. It doesn't dictate the way my day looks like. It doesn't dictate any behavior that I have. It's just there. Same with this incomplete Sadiq. An incomplete Sadiq is a person who was able to eradicate evil to the point that it doesn't speak to him anymore. It's got no power of lure, no seduction whatsoever. It's just there. Now, that is a level that is, if we recall the 5 levels, like he's mentioning, that is higher than the level of the Benoni, which is therefore higher than the level that the Tanya wants to bring us all to. The Benoni, the in-betweener, right? Or the intermediary person who still struggles. That pet does still bother him. It's interesting, Winston Churchill writes in his memoirs that he fought depression quite strongly. And throughout his entire life, almost like that animal soul that we have to fight our entire lives. And at one point, he decided to call it the black dog, to refer to his depression as the black dog. Black dog that sometimes was silent, but sometimes was barking so strongly that he himself writes he would want to jump off a ship. That's how he puts it. But that I think is a good description of the Benoni, not the incomplete Sadiq. The incomplete Sadiq has that black dog, but it's silent, it's shut. It doesn't bother him whatsoever. The Benoni has that black dog that from time to time shouts or barks. Sometimes it barks louder than other days. But that's a good image to best describe those 5 types. So you have the one that's completely, let's just refresh our memory from chapter 1. The one that's Rasha, the complete wicked. Complete wicked is a person whose black dog has completely, just to use that analogy, has completely taken control of him. Then you have a person that's the incomplete Rasha. And that is that the black dog takes control of him most of the time. Then you have the Benoni, which is again what we are aspiring to be. And that is a person whose black dog is there barking, but he himself has control over it. He doesn't, yes, it bothers him, and sometimes it even gets the better of him, but he's in control. Now we're talking about the incomplete Sadiq, whose black dog is there, but it doesn't even speak to him anymore. No matter how many times that black dog barks. And then you have the complete Sadiq, who was able to take the black dog and give it away, throw it out the window, whatever it is. So those are the 5 levels. But I think it's a good analogy because it reminds us of that constant battle. But let's continue, unless again, I don't want to be just monologuing as This is supposed to be a dialogue of learning. Lilmod, lilamed, to teach, to learn is the same word in Hebrew. We've often said, because I have much to learn from you too. So I'd like to hear what you have to say. Otherwise, we can continue. Okay, let's continue. Continue.
In its most literal sense, the phrase "a tzaddik to whom is evil" relates to the issue of reward and punishment and the age-old question: why do the righteous suffer? Why do they experience evil? However, as chapter 1 already discussed, the phrase also has a deeper meaning relating to the inner composition of the incomplete Sadiq, implying that there still lingers in him a fragment of evil in the left ventricle. This is the place of residence of the animal soul, as chapter 9 elaborated.
Right. Okay, so we can go into this a little bit. The phrase of the Talmud that is used to describe that incomplete tzaddik is tzaddik vegalo, which can be interpreted in one of three ways. The third way is not discussed here, but we'll mention it. Tzaddik vegalo means a tzaddik and he suffers. Like he says, galo, something is bothering him, something is irritating him. Ra. That's one expression, one interpretation. And that refers to the tzaddikim, the righteous, that even they suffer. And thus the question of why bad things happen to good people. And that we discussed in chapter 9. Then there's the second interpretation, tzaddik vegalo, which is the interpretation of the Tanya, which means a tzaddik, a person that's righteous, but galo, he still has some bad. That sleeping black dog we were just speaking about. So bad is still there within him, and he's left part of the body, left ventricle, as he calls it here, but it doesn't lure him whatsoever. And then there's a third interpretation. A third interpretation, which he doesn't speak about explicitly, but he certainly speaks about this third interpretation indirectly, and that is tzaddik ve'realo. What does that mean? Rea, you see the word in Hebrew for bad is reish ayin. He spelled reish ayin, which means bad, ra. But if you change the vowels, not the letters, you can spell out the word rea, which means friend. Like the famous verse, ve'avta lere'acha kamocha, that you should love your fellow as yourself. Rea, same word. A tzaddik and who has a friend to him. What does that mean? And what this really means, and that's why the Tanya does speak about this indirectly, is that this type of righteous person was able to use the animal soul and make it his friend. How can you make the animal soul your friend? The animal soul wants you to fail. The animal wants you to sin, to falter. How can you make the animal soul your friend? And that is because the tzaddik recognizes, as we've spoken about, that the animal soul is just an animal soul. It's not an evil soul. It's an animal soul. An animal soul that wants animalistic desires. But if you're able to divorce the animal soul, the animal soul's desires from the animal soul's essence, and focus really on the essence of the animal soul, you can make it your friend. What's the essence of the animal soul? Essence of the animal soul has passion, has strength, has determination, has conviction. All these traits are not necessarily bad. Now, yes, the animal soul uses its passion in order to do something evil. But if you're able to divorce again the desires and the eventual actions of the animal soul from its essence, from its natural traits like passion, determination, conviction, then you'll be able also to take all that determination, conviction, passion, and all those traits, and then use them as your friend to channel your godly soul. And that's why a righteous person that's on that level, tzaddik ve'realo, can make the animal soul his friend by using it as a springboard for the godly soul. Because he recognizes again that the animal soul is not necessarily bad. Just needs to be trained like a good animal. And if it could be trained for your good, for your godly soul, then you'll make it your friend. You can make an animal your friend with a lot of training, a lot of rewiring, so to speak. But eventually an animal can be your friend. And that's really the art or the skill of this type of tzaddik. Not everyone can do that. Most of us can only control the animal soul at best. Can't make it our friend. But they are able to divorce again the animal soul's desires from the animal soul's essence and use the essence as a springboard for the godly soul. That's a deeper interpretation of the Odrea, but that also is what the Talmud is hinting to. So again, you have three interpretations. The tzaddik.
Rabbi?
Yes, please.
I guess, is that why, I mean, there are some symbols within Judaism that refer to animals and certain good animals, or even in talking about with the sacrifices and all of that, with, I guess that connects to some of that, goodness within the animal soul.
Absolutely. A very good point. I mean, there's a lot of emphasis in Judaism about animals. The first and foremost, the tribes have symbols of animals. The 12 tribes. We haven't used they have multiple symbols we used here in the synagogue because that question might come to mind. We used other symbols because some say that you shouldn't have pictures of animals in a synagogue, and therefore we didn't use the animal symbols. But if you look at the verses, Judah, for example, that's the most famous, is compared to a lion. Dan is compared to a snake. And you can go on and on. Naphtali is compared to a deer. The tribes have symbols of animals. You also have symbols of animals in what's called, it's a very unfortunately unknown prayer. But there is what's called, and I would encourage everyone to look it up, what's called Pirkei Shira, which means chapters of song. So if you Google it, chapters of song, Jewish, or you'll find it. But apparently, according to the Zohar, every animal sings a song to God every day. Even dogs. Dogs may be barking in the morning while maybe they pray. They sang one of the hallelujahs, in fact, of King David, of the book of Psalms. So animals also, the animals themselves also have a very divinely inspired routine every day. And they have a divine connection themselves, some more than others. There are stories about Rabbi Yitzchak Luria, one of the foremost Kabbalists, who would very often give his classes outside in the fields of Tzfat. And sometimes animals would join those classes. And he would refer to those animals as reincarnations of souls. Needed to come down to study. So sometimes you have animals that are also reincarnations of souls. So animals could be very, very good. You're right. And in fact, animals, like you just said, are brought as sacrifices to God. Also because they serve as a bridge in a way between us and God. And also relate to this idea that we too should be sacrificing, or at least channeling our animal soul for our divine work. And like the tzaddik that is incomplete does, make it our friend for our divine work, right? But you're right, animals take the center stage very often in Judaism. Look, it's interesting because that's how we came out of Egypt. We just celebrated Passover. What was the convincing act for God, at least, to take us out of Egypt? When we were able to take a sheep and sacrifice it to God. That sheep being the God of the Egyptians, we were able to take it with conviction, without any fear that they might retaliate against us. And we sacrificed it to God. And eventually that's what made us free. So an animal played a very strong role in the Grand Exodus. So you're right. But again, I think what's interesting is that if I had to pinpoint the common denominator between all of the mentions of animals in the Torah and beyond, what's interesting is that all of those mentions are mentions of animals in the context of God. So animals, sacrifices for God. Pirkei Shirah, like we just said, they sing songs for God. Or even the sheep was sacrificed for God to enable the grand exodus. Because what the Torah is trying to teach us is what the Tanya is trying to teach us, and that is that animals have the power to be harnessed towards our divine worship. We just need to be able to connect the animal to God in order for the animal indeed within us or without or outside of us to really serve its divine purpose. I think that's the common denominator, which is also important to remember. And also the tribes, same with the tribes. Their animalistic flag or symbol was really immediately described as a divine trait that they had. Judah, for example, is a lion. Why? Because he's seen as the leader of the family that came to save Joseph from the pit. And he sold him by selling him to slaves, but he still saved his life. And the other areas in which he stood up for truth. And that's the trait of the lion, the king of the jungle, right? So as long as you have these animalistic traits and you connect them to God, you elevate them. Again, you divorce, like we were saying, the desires from the essence, and you take the essence in order to channel and fuel your connection with God, then the animals are not just okay, but they are celebrated, and they ought to be elevated through that celebration.
What is the reason then of not using the symbols in shul?
Okay, so that's a good question, and that is because some shuls do. Our shul didn't, because it's not just symbols of animals, also human beings are not allowed to, like a nice piece of art of a human being cannot be hung in shul, or animals, birds. And that's because the simplest reason is because we don't want to have distractions as we pray, and those may become distractions. But also the deeper reason, as Maimonides points out, and that is that one may think, stranger that comes into the synagogue sees us praying in a synagogue, that stranger might think, if he has no knowledge of Judaism whatsoever, he may think, oh, we may be bowing down to animals, bowing down to human beings. So it gives the wrong message.